Ho ho, hello everyone, and welcome to another new episode of Awesome Albums with Awesome Andrew. As you saw from the title, not only is this so massive that it needs to be broken up into 2 episodes, but you can guarantee a very long extras episode as well. So let's not waste any more time. A Christmas gift to all of you is The Who and their 1969 rock opera, Tommy. Before I dive into this massive album, I need to introduce the band. Roger Daltrey, who is our lead vocalist and also does harmonica. Pete Townsend, guitarist and keyboardist, and probably has just as many vocals as Roger Daltrey does. John Entwistle, who plays bass, French horn, and some vocals. And Keith Moon, who is our favorite crazy drummer. I guess I'll dive into a bit of the history of how this album came to be, and then talk about the album cover. Pete Townsend has always been obsessed with stories. In the mid-60s, there were very few songwriters who were more interested than Townsend in creating songs that fit into a story. I want to say that this started when Pete had an idea called Quads that was set in the future where parents could select the genders of their children. The main conflict of the story is the couple gets a boy instead of the girl that they ordered, but they did their best to raise their unwanted child anyway. And this concept is pretty much what created their 1966 song, I'm a Boy. Townsend continued to work on this concept of telling a story through music, and on their second album is a 9-minute suite, which is also the title track to a quick one.
Told me he loved you, he ain't no lying either. So let's have a smile for an old engine driver.
In the mid to late 60s, several artists started to stray away from singles and focused more on the album as a whole, and that led to a lot of artists creating concept albums. I mean, in 1966, you had the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, and in 67, you had the Beatles with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and Moody Blues' Days of Future Past, just to name a few. Naturally, The Who was going to get on this as well, and created a concept album revolving around a pirate radio, and in between the songs were little radio jingles. The Who Sellout is often debated as the decade's best concept album. Do I think it is? I don't know. It is pretty awesome, though. Now I want to talk about that album, but let me move forward in time a bit. At this point, around 68, Pete Townsend had recently followed Indian spiritual leader Meher Baba. He felt that rock fans would be out to find the same answers that he was seeking. In 1968, Pete started writing the skeleton for a story at the time was just called Deaf, Dumb, and Blind Boy. Manager Kit Lambert gave Pete the idea of making a rock opera, which incorporated a lot of elements of a classical piece. But this time for The Who was a very stressful time. They were barely getting by. In fact, they would record in the afternoon, then rush off to a concert in the evening to pay for the recording they did that afternoon. They pretty much only had about $100 a week for themselves, and everything else went towards the band. There was a legal battle with producer Shel Talmy, and between that and some bad business deals in England, they would be facing bankruptcy if this upcoming album didn't sell. Naturally, this put a lot of stress on the band. Daltrey said there was just as much talking as there was recording, and Entwistle said he had no idea what the story was or who the characters were, but rose to the occasion when Townsend needed him to write a couple songs about abuse. And this upcoming album becomes Tommy. The story about a deaf, dumb, and blind boy. Now, the original story has it that Tommy was born deaf, dumb, and blind, and is played by The Who, which is a musical entity. He is represented musically, represented by a theme they play, which starts off the opera itself. But Tommy, he sees things as vibrations, which we translate as music. This is paraphrased by Townsend himself. It is possible that Helen Keller was a template for Tommy. After all, she was deaf, blind, and mute, and rose up against all challenges and became a very inspirational figure in history. She passed away in June of 1968, which is close to the same time that they started working on Tommy, and can almost be seen as some kind of reincarnation. Now, a couple differences between this original concept and the final product is Tommy wasn't born blind. After facing a traumatic experience, he receded into himself and closed himself off from the rest of the world and became deaf, dumb, and blind that way. Pete also discussed a scene where the boy's father would come into his room and start talking to him about how normal fathers would bring their sons to a football game or teach them how to play. He then asks, "Can you hear me?" which naturally he can't. The father then starts beating the child, which Tommy doesn't see as anything but just stimulus. He doesn't associate it with pain because he doesn't know what pain is. It's just vibrations. Then the father starts to get the mother in on this to take the child away to live with an uncle. Now, this is in the story, but the father beating him, I don't believe out of all the times I've listened to this album that made it into the final product. Pete describes, as the story goes on, the child seems to respond very well to the word Tommy. He decides that this Tommy is a king and a goal to achieve. A concept that Pete wanted to make sure got into the story was him seeing himself in a mirror and bases his whole life around what he saw, not realizing that it was just him. They started recording in the fall of 1968, and they wrote some songs later used on the album, and were hoping to get the album out for the Christmas time in 1968, but unfortunately they slowly started to see that release date being pushed back until May 23rd of 1969. That is a lot of explanation. Let's move on to that album cover now. The album cover was designed by fellow Baba Alkalite Mike McInerney. You notice this meshwork on the front cover of Clouds is a Void is meant to represent a kind of breaking out of a certain restricted freedom, although I always just thought it reminded me of a pie crust. This album had a few working titles: Amazing Journey, which became the song name, Journey into Space, The Brain Opera, and Omnibus. The image of the mesh continues onto the back cover with a hand busting through the net. I'm assuming it's representing Tommy trying to break out of his mental prison. The image also continues into the gatefold with the lyrics to Amazing Journey. The gatefold opens up so you can see the entire mesh all at once without having to turn the album over and everything, but there is an image on the back of that which has 3 lights on a wall. The first light is very bright, the second one is very dim, and the third one pretty much has no light at all. I can almost see this as a metaphor for Tommy himself. He was able to see, and then after said traumatic event happened, he closed off from the rest of the world, so no light shined through. You can also look at it in reverse, where he was blind, and then slowly let some light in, and then he was able to rise up and see again. There are so many interpretations you can make for this, and it's just really fascinating to look at. I have so much more to say, but I know you really want to hear the music. Not only will I be talking about this album, but I will also be talking about Ken Russell's 1975 movie based off the album. Yeah, that's why this video is so massive. Not only is it a rock opera, it's a double album rock opera with a movie, and the movie has its own soundtrack. No opera is complete without an overture. The overture was so neat, and the more times I listened to it, the more I realized just how important it is. This instrumental track changes so many times and features elements and motifs from about half the songs on the album, and it blends so well together.
Captain Walker didn't come home, his unborn child will never know him. Believe him, miss him with a number of men, don't expect to see him again.
Okay, I guess it's not entirely an instrumental, but these few lyrics set up a major part of the story. Set in World War I era, Captain Walker goes missing during an expedition, and they don't believe they're going to see him again. This leads us to the second track on CD releases, but lumped together with the overture on the original vinyl release. Captain Walker's widow gives birth to their son, Tommy. The movie calls this track Captain Walker / It's a Boy. It's funny to point out that the end of the song Glow Girl, which is a bonus track for Sellout, sings,
It's a girl, Mrs. Walker, it's a girl.
I'm wondering if this is some kind of leftover concept from where I'm a Boy came from. 1921 takes place in 1921. It was originally called You Didn't Hear It on the original MCA, LP, and CD pressings. In the movie, it's 1951 instead of 1921, which I think actually makes more sense. And I'll explain why 51 makes more sense in this video and, of course, the second part. This is a major part of the story, and it's set a few years later after Tommy is born. Captain Walker returns home to discover his wife has found a new lover. Captain murders this man in an altercation, not realizing a young Tommy is watching.
What about the boy? He saw it all. You didn't hear it, you didn't see it.
His mother, played by Anne Margaret in the movie, realizes this and tells Tommy, you didn't hear it, you didn't see it. And I love how they have subtly in there Roger Daltrey replying, I heard it and I saw it. Between the trauma of watching his parents commit murder in front of him and then threatening him not to tell anyone what happened forced Tommy to recede into himself. Interestingly, the movie has the lover, Frank Hobbs, played by Oliver Reed, murder Captain Walker, and he continues to act as Tommy's father throughout the rest of the movie. So, in the album, Captain Walker kills Lover, and the movie, Lover kills Captain Walker. Tommy, who is now closed off from the outside world, now has to rely on his sense of touch and imagination, and starts to develop an interesting imagination. Pete Townshend says the pivotal song was Amazing Journey. That was the song that tries to tell the whole story. It tries to be the introduction to Tommy. As soon as I'd written it, I then had the shape for the piece. End quote.
The vagueries of delirium creeps upon me. All at once a tall stranger I suddenly see.
A lot of people praise this song in particular to have some of the best lyrics. I have to agree, the lyrics are just fantastic at painting a picture of what's going on in Tommy's imagination. Amazing Journey leads into the album's second instrumental, Sparks, although the original vinyl had these two together as one song. Townshend wanted Tommy to have other interstitial material that would include battle noises and pinball sound effects, but abandoned that idea in his rush to complete the album. Sparks was originally going to be called Dream Sequence and got its title from a 1962 Meher Baba saying called Sparks of the Truth. Pete Townshend later said that the version on Live at Leeds, released in 1970, gets as close to as what's possible for that classical rock thing. The first song on the album, not written by Townshend, and the only one on the album not written by a member of the band. This song has lyrics written by Sonny Boy Williamson, although Townshend did change a couple of lyrics and wrote the music for it. The original lyrics were, "Her daddy must have been a millionaire," and then Mose Allison changed the lyrics for his version, "Her daddy's got some money," and then Pete changed it to, "You know her daddy gave her magic." Despite being a cover, it's so interesting how well it fit into this album. I mean, it mentions being deaf, dumb, and blind. And this song is about a man who advertises that he knows somebody who can heal Tommy's conditions, and we'll meet her again in a few more songs. The movie puts a slightly different spin on the Hawker, played by Eric Clapton. He's a preacher leading a bunch of women wearing Marilyn Monroe masks. Tommy, played by Daltrey, reaches up to touch the Marilyn statue, which then comes crashing down. Oh, hold on. I gotta flip the record over. Wait, that's not right. They put side 4 on the back of side 1? So, then, this other one is side 2 and 3. Why'd they do that? They did to accommodate the record changers. There are actually quite a few double albums that do that. I still find it weird, though.
Did you ever see the faces of the children? They get so excited.
And I bet you're wondering why I picked this album for December. This song is why. It's a Christmas song, just probably the most depressing Christmas song I've ever heard. I'm not asking to make this a challenge. The song starts off happy with a bunch of kids excited to unwrap presents. Tommy's father is worried about Tommy's future and soul.
How can he be saved from the eternal grave?
That's a depressing chorus. Although just because Tommy is deaf, dumb, and blind doesn't mean he can't find Jesus, but that's not the main focus of the song. And if you look at the lyrics, you'll notice the kids at the beginning aren't really excited about Jesus either. They're just excited about opening presents, as most little kids are. So some interpret this as an attack on organized religion. And it definitely does have a lot of that in the song, and in fact, the album as a whole has a bunch of that.
Playing boxy pinball, picks his nose and smiles and folds his tongue at everything.
Pete Townshend recorded the song originally as a sparse piano-based demo, and had slightly different lyrics, where originally the line was "playing with himself, he sits and smiles," was changed to "playing pinball, picks his nose and smiling." I'm really glad they changed that.
Tommy, can you hear me? Tommy, can you hear me?
This is the first very important motif that we will hear throughout the album.
See me, feel me.
this is the second. Tommy is aware of what's going on. He's calling out, see me, feel me, touch me, heal me. Very powerful vocal done by Roger Daltrey. This is the first song that was written by somebody else in the band other than Townsend. One of two songs that John Entwistle wrote. Entwistle was the only member of The Who that can read music and composed the song using nearly every chord from A to F sharp, both majors and minors, and you can hear almost every chord in the music scale being played here. John's inspiration for Cousin Kevin is supposedly based on some kid living on his street. Both parents encouraged the boys to be friends, but the kid just wasn't nice to John. But honestly, I'm sure we've all had a Cousin Kevin sometime during our life. In Tommy's case, he was with Cousin Kevin because his parents were beginning to neglect him and leave him to be tortured by Cousin Kevin. Although, I'm sure they didn't know how much he was getting abused, but maybe they figured to have somebody else beat some sense into him so that way they wouldn't feel like bad parents by doing it themselves. I don't know, but that almost makes them worse parents, actually. I guess the important lesson to take from this is, don't beat your kids, and don't pass them off to somebody else so that way they can beat them.
And spikes in your seat. If your child ain't all he should be now.
The person the hawker advertised was the Acid Queen. This was another attempt to heal Tommy. This is my first instance to how the movie's 1951 makes more sense than the album's 1921. The reference of drugs, more specifically LSD, which I don't know exactly when LSD was made. I know naturally it was very popular in the 60s rather than the mid-30s. I'm pretty sure it was made sometime in the 60s. I don't know that for sure. I don't want that in my search history of when LSD was made. If you listen to the lyrics, it's really interesting. It could really be interpreted to drugs or sex. I do remember seeing a Tommy documentary a few years ago, and Pete saying that Tommy experiences his first orgasm, but the other context of the album points more towards drugs. Townsend describes the character of the Acid Queen to be a metaphor for peer pressure, a black-hearted gypsy who had promised to bring Tommy out of his autistic condition, but was actually a sexual monster, using drugs to break him down. End quote by Townsend. In the movie, Tina Turner takes the role of the Acid Queen and plays it more predatorily than what you'd hear on the original album, but Townsend called her performance stunning. Little fun fact for the movie is that they reversed the order for Acid Queen and Cousin Kevin around. I don't know why they did that, but that's what they did. The drugs the Acid Queen gave Tommy gave him an acid trip. This is the longest track on the album at almost 10 minutes in length. The interesting thing I find with this track, like Sparks, is you get to hear what it's like in Tommy's head. After all, Tommy can really only pick up on vibrations that translates to music. And I read a really interesting interpretation that suggested that the length of the song could also indicate a passage of time. I don't know if that's what The Who was going for, but it's at least an interesting theory. Something I noticed when listening to the Overture is how similar it sounds to Rael from Sell Out. So far, Tommy's life has only been one unfortunate event after another. Well, I'll just say it gets worse before it gets better. There was one more major setback for Tommy, but we'll have to wait for that for part 2. But until then, I hope you enjoyed part 1. And if you subscribe, you'll be notified as soon as part 2 comes out. What will become of Tommy? Find out in 2017. But until then, I want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas, be nice to all the Tommies of the world, and I hope to see all of you next year.